We are military analytics. Technology is changing every day. This change is also affecting warfare. Many war machines are now being built using artificial intelligence and advanced technological inventions. Special military aircrafts, drones, tanks, and missile systems. But despite these advances, armies can suffer huge losses. Very interesting things have been happening in the Russian army in recent days. Bombs dropped from airplanes used by Russian soldiers have fallen on the Russian city of Belgorod. There is an extraordinary crisis in Russia. The Russian people are experiencing a major security crisis. Tension in the country has risen very high. What is the background of these events? How did warplanes with advanced technologies bomb Russian cities? Everything is changing in the war between Russia and Ukraine. None of the Russian army's war plans have worked. That's why the Russian army is trying to develop new war strategies. But the Ukrainian army continues to show a historic resistance against Russia. It is now common knowledge that the Russian army's ground forces cannot win a victory in Ukraine, having lost a large number of tanks. The Russian army now wants to launch air operations. However, the first attempt of these operations caused a major crisis. It is known that one of the most effective aircraft of the Russian aerospace forces is the Su-34 special military aircraft. The Russian government claimed that it was the most powerful military aircraft in the world. However, this operation has revealed how irrational Russia's claims are. A Russian Su-34, a twin-engine fighter bomber, was assigned to bomb the Ukrainian army, but the bombs dropped from the plane fell on the city of Belgorod, 24 miles north of Ukraine. There was a huge panic in the city. There have been explosions in the Russian city of Belgorod since the beginning of the war. Extraordinary developments are taking place in the areas used by the Russian army in this city. An incident in January was one of the most important consequences of the problems in the city, especially sergeants serving in the unit. In the Kurachchinsky district of the city of Belgorod threw a grenade to establish authority and caused the death of 3 Russian soldiers. In addition, 16 people were injured in this incident. This mistake of the Russian sergeant soon became known in the city. Moreover, since the beginning of the war, missile shells have often fallen on the city. Thousands of Russian citizens living in Belgorod started to leave the city. The bombs dropped from the Su-34 aircraft caused the crisis in the city to grow even more. Thousands of Russians tried to flee the city immediately after the bombing. After everyone set off, traffic was blocked and chaos ensued in the city. Meanwhile, the Russian people began to feel a great fear after the incident became public knowledge. The Russian government made a statement. According to a statement from the Kremlin, the Su-34 planes had to urgently release the munitions they were carrying. The Russian fighter pilots released these bombs so that they would not fall on the city and kill hundreds of people. But for the Russian people, this explanation was not acceptable. First, it was never acceptable that the Su-34 planes had difficulty carrying bombs. The people of Belgorod are wondering why these planes dropped bombs. A young man in Belgorod told the Russian press, "If this is an accident, those who caused the accident should resign." After this approach of the people of Belgorod, the reaction against Putin's government in Russia increased even more. However, some news in the Russian press claimed that the incident was not an accident. After these claims, the Russian people experienced a great shock. It is known that soldiers in the Russian army are subjected to racism and mobbing. Moreover, most of the soldiers serving in the Russian army do not want to invade Ukraine. This leads Russian soldiers to take extraordinary decisions. Since the beginning of the war, there have been many incidents of Russian soldiers damaging ammunition on many fronts. Many Russian soldiers are forced to fight. In addition, Russian commanders treat the soldiers very badly, especially soldiers from Russia's minority peoples are constantly subjected to racism in the army. These soldiers hate their commanders. Allegations that Russian Air Force pilots deliberately dropped these bombs on the city of Belgorod are now the talk of the town in Russia. Following these allegations, the Russian Air Force has decided to suspend air operations. Anton Gerashchenko, advisor to the Ukrainian Interior Minister, tweeted about the issue. Gerashchenko said it seems the Russians have started a counter-offensive against themselves. This incident in the Russian army has turned into a major security crisis. It is said that these operations have been stopped in case Russian pilots attack the Kremlin. Putin is afraid that Russian soldiers will start a big revolt against. It is claimed that the majority of Russia's soldiers hate Putin. However, Russian commanders are very strict on this issue and prevent anti-Putin Russian soldiers from organizing. It is thought that if Russian soldiers start to act together against Putin, Putin will not be able to do anything. Recently, tensions between Putin and Russian commanders have increased. Russian commanders may act together with rebel soldiers and stage a military coup against them. Russian commanders may act together with rebel soldiers and stage a military coup against Putin. Russian media reports say that there is no concrete evidence of a coup at the moment. However, the opinions of experts who research on Russia on this issue are very clear. According to experts, if the Russian army suffers more losses in Ukraine, Russian commanders may stage a coup against Putin. Russian security problems are increasing, raising the possibility of a military coup. After the bombs dropped in Belgorod, the Russian people are outraged against Putin, and the danger in Belgorod remains. There was another very interesting development in the city today. Belgorod Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov announced that another bomb has been found in the city. It was announced that one of the bombs dropped from the plane has not exploded yet. Houses around the bomb site were immediately evacuated. According to the governor, 3,000 people have been removed from the area. It was decided that this bomb would be destroyed in a controlled manner by explosive technicians and bomb disposal experts. The evacuated Russian citizens experienced a great panic in Russia. Such incidents are doing Putin a lot of damage. These problems in the Russian army are affecting the course of the war. Ukrainian army is also carrying out very successful operations and inflicting a heavier defeat on the Russian army. What do you think about the bombs in Belgorod? Do you think these bombs were really dropped by Russian pilots? What do you think about these allegations in Russia? How do you think these events affect Putin? How do you think the crisis in the Russian army are affecting the course of the war? The war between Ukraine and Russia changed the basic balances in the world militarily, socio-economically, and politically as the tension in the war reached its peak. The conflict zones affected by the war also flared up, while the countries of the world were going through a process of disintegration due to the Ukraine-Russian war. It was inevitable for Moscow to exhaust its military and political volume. Over time, the effects of the war also changed the global balances in the Middle East. Iran's support for Russia's aim of turning the Middle East into its own farm in order to raise front forces has mobilized Israel, which has a say in this region. Israel continues to be sharply opposed to Russia's use of Iran and its Iranian-backed militant forces in Syria to reshape the playing field. Recently, Israel's military and financial support to Ukraine has caused a serious crisis between Russia and Israel in Syria. Israel, which did not remain silent about Russia's purchase of kamikaze drones from Iran, pressed the button to disrupt this game in Syria and to support Ukraine on the front lines in response to Russian and Iranian cooperation. Israel provided the Ukrainian army with the necessary details and crucial intelligence data on drones. There are even allegations that some Israeli defense companies are providing advanced anti-drone warfare systems to Ukraine via Poland. The Israeli administration did not undertake such a shipment, but announced that it would not intervene in the situation since it was made through a private company. Currently, Ukraine has even been able to carry airstrikes to Russian territory thanks to these data provided by Israel. Israel, which wants to prevent Russia and Iran from cooperating with Ukraine, which is fighting for the freedom war in the Middle East, launched an attack on the Damascus airport in Syria the other day. These attacks, which aim to destroy Iranian-related targets and Russian resources at the airport, were a heavy blow to the Moscow and Tehran administrations. While Russia targeted the civilian infrastructures of Ukraine with Iranian-made UAVs, Israel's 4 F-16 fighter jets reportedly bombed the military airport with at least 8 missiles. It is seen that Israeli jets carried out a successful operation at midnight by surpassing the Russian-made air defense systems in Syria and even the S-300 air defense systems that Russia gave to Iran. Satellite images showed that one runway at Damascus airport was hit by multiple missiles, while the other was hit by only one missile. 2 Iranian-backed militant group members were killed and 3 were injured in airstrikes targeting Israel's Damascus International Airport. It has been announced that material damage also occurred at the Damascus airport in the Israeli attacks and that the main international airport in the capital was temporarily taken out of service due to the damage. Satellite images also revealed a remarkable detail during Israeli airstrikes. It was understood that generally relatively large weapons were smuggled through this airport by Iranian cargo lines, which frequently landed at Damascus International Antiyas, or D4 air base outside the city of Palmyra in central Syria. In the frames reflected in the satellite images, the change in the military resources of Iran and Russia over time, and the differences after the attack summarize the situation better. It was claimed that some of the Iranian and Russian warplanes and other military resources disappeared at Damascus airport before the Israeli airstrikes. It was also reported that an Iranian cargo plane had launched at Damascus airport during the attack. The damage or explosion of some Iranian military resources at the airport further aggravated the relations between Israel and the Russian-Iranian alliance. Syrian regional intelligence sources reported that Israeli airstrikes also targeted an outpost controlled by Iranian-linked militias. It is known that the shower of air-launched missiles by Israeli fighter jets destroyed the Iranian-backed militia post, as well as targets south of Damascus. The Israeli Air Force has previously targeted this airport. In recent weeks, entry and exit from Damascus International Airport has been suspended for 2 weeks after alleged Tel Aviv jets caused extensive damage to infrastructure, including a runway and a terminal. Tehran-based media channels also reported that IRGC or Hezbollah soldiers and their positions were under fire. There is a different power union in Syria. A substantial portion of the Syrian army consists of Iranian-backed militias or IRGC soldiers and commanders. In addition, Russia has a very serious military presence in the region. In this case, it is stated that the open alliance of Iran and Russia in Syria, or serving similar purposes, goes against Israel's regional and national interests. In addition to the Damascus airport, Israel has also allegedly hit Aleppo International Airport in recent months. But Tel Aviv denies most of these attacks. Western and regional intelligence sources revealed that Tehran is adopting civilian air transport as a more reliable means of delivering military equipment to its forces and militants in Syria after Israel allegedly interrupted its ground supply. Both the Iranian administration and Russia are quite hesitant about Israel supporting Ukraine and destroying the sources of cooperation between Moscow and Tehran in Syria. On the other hand, especially the Tehran administration is very afraid that Israel would target strategic air bases such as Damascus or Aleppo again. It has claimed that especially Iran's military resources are concentrated in Aleppo. The damage or destruction of some of Russia's military equipment at the Damascus airport brought the global tension in the war to the last point. But Israel's courage is determined not to give a voice to this alliance. Tel Aviv signaled that it would change the balance in Syria during the period when non-war civilian attacks against Ukraine continued. As a rule, the Israeli military does not comment on specific attacks in Syria, but acknowledges that it had conducted hundreds of sorties against Iranian-backed groups trying to gain a foothold in the country and Russian military forces in that region. And Israel, by continuing these attacks, is trying to accelerate the building of an environment of trust in the Middle East. Israel, as the only state that opposes Russia and Iran's interest-based Middle East project, is making moves to the advantage of Ukraine, while Russia is trying to train some of its military units in Syria, and the possibility that these units can be used in the Ukraine war in the necessary time periods. The situation is much more complicated. While Israel's reassuring approach to Ukraine at least provides a little more peace in the region after Israel launched attacks on Iranian and Russian targets in Syria to support the Ukrainian government, Tehran and Moscow administrations also began to take precautions against airstrikes in Syria. Syria and Iran have deployed new air defense systems, including jamming and early warning systems around Damascus to prevent Israeli airstrikes in the region. There are reports that the new systems are being built by Korean and Chinese companies and supplied by Iran under agreements reached between Damascus and Tehran. It was also noted last week that Iran is trying to rekindle the expansion of its presence near Damascus, which it has always tried to do, but has previously been blocked by Russia. Tehran's goal is to create another southern suburb in Syria, commonly known as Doha, like the Hezbollah-dominated suburb of Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Now, with Israel's direct intervention in the game, the landscape in the Middle East has changed. Russia seems to need allies to invade Ukraine. Therefore, Iran, which provides unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles to Moscow to be used against the Ukrainians, is evacuating the region due to threats of Israel. Tensions peaked in the Ukrainian city of Kiev amid Russia's missile attack on Ukraine on the last day of December when Moscow and Tehran stirred up again. Authorities also announced that Iranian-made Russian UAVs targeted infrastructure in and around the Ukrainian capital, damaging power facilities and causing some power outages. The Ukrainian Air Force reported that its air defense systems deployed all of Russia's 39 Iranian-made Shahed UAVs targeting Ukraine overnight, describing it as a major attack. Kiev Governor Alexei Kuleba stated that the Russians launched several waves of Shahed drones and targeted critical infrastructure facilities. But Kuleba added that the air defense in Ukraine is at work. Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko announced that 40 drones were on their way to Kiev overnight. Klitschko also noted that of the 22 drones over Kiev, 3 were destroyed in the remote region of Kiev and 15 inches neighboring provinces. The drone army of the armed forces of Ukraine completely changed the fate of the war on all front lines from Crimea to Luhansk. Ukraine's UAVs have undertaken successful attack missions that will go down in history. Over time, the rules of the game changed and the war reached the Russian lands. Yes, the fire that the Ukrainians started for the sake of independence finally managed to cross the borders of Russia. Undoubtedly, the UAVs were the main actors in this success. Ukraine has repeatedly targeted critical border cities such as Russia's Belgorod with the drones they use. After each attack, an atmosphere of panic grows in Russia, and as Russian citizens try to recover from the socio-psychological effects of the war, Ukraine's drone attacks drag them into an even more intractable depression. The dangerous fire brought by the environment of chaos that started in Belgorod slowly began to envelop other cities of Russia. Ukraine had enough of a drone army to worry the Russians. Therefore, with the exception of Belgorod, Russian cities at much great distances could easily be targeted by Ukrainian drones. The other day, one of the most interesting attacks on the subject struck Russia again. The target of the Ukrainian drone army this time was the Russian city of Krasnodar. An explosion occurred in an oil depot in the Krasnodar territory, and a huge fire broke out shortly after this explosion. The source of the explosion that initially caused the fire was unclear, but the cause of the explosion was revealed as a result of the first researches. The source of this stunning explosion was, again, a drone attack. As a result of this drone attack, the infrastructure of the oil depot belonging to the Rosneft company was badly damaged. The exact number of drones involved in the attack on the oil depot was not disclosed. However, judging by the photos shared by the locals on social media, it seemed highly likely that a large number of drones were used due to the severity and effects of the attack on the oil storage base. The city of Krasnodar in the Russian Federation is at least 470 kilometers away from the Ukrainian front lines. The city is a critical region between the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, connecting Crimea and Russia. With such attacks, Ukraine may be aiming to cut the logistics connection or supply lines between the Crimea and the Russian army. In photographs taken by Krasnodar residents, it turned out that the fire that started after the explosion was quite strong. Its consequences could not be eliminated for quite some time, and fire and a huge pillar of smoke could be observed from a distance of several kilometers. It was not specified what type of drones were used in the attack, but pots of the drones carrying large quantities of plastic explosives were found on the territory of Belgorod a few hours before the attack. The fact that there was a similar attack in the city of Belgorod, which is constantly targeted by Ukrainian drones, brought to mind that Kiev planned the unexplained attack in Krasnodar. As a result, the extent of the damage to the Rosneft oil depot has not yet been specified. However, the most important detail of the attack was that the UAVs had reached the Krasnodar territory, and this issue was considered as a very serious concern in Russia. The effective range of the Soviet Aerojet-powered drones of the Ukrainian forces up to 800 kilometers raised question marks in minds. Russia's concerns on this issue might actually be justified because drones, which have an effective range of 800 kilometers, can reach much farther than this distance, and they don't actually need to travel that far. The reason for this is that the distance between Krasnodar and Berdyansk is about 540 kilometers. In other words, even if the Ukrainians began these attacks from Berdyansk, they can easily reach the Russian city of Krasnodar with their drone army. Therefore, it is not impossible for Krasnodar to be targeted by Ukrainians. There is, however, another view regarding the source of the attack. It is also possible that the libertarian anti-war Russian citizens within the borders of Russia may have carried out these attacks. Even if one of the two possibilities is true, these attacks are of great importance to show the Russians a truth. If the attacks targeting the oil refinery in Krasnodar were carried out by Russian citizens who are against the war, it means that even the Russians do not want this war to continue. If we consider the other possibility, that is, if the Ukrainian forces carried out these attacks from Berdyansk or any Ukrainian city within range to carry out the attack, the situation is still bad for the Russians because this time Ukraine would carry the war to a completely different dimension and would have focused on cross-border airstrikes. And the effects of the war would be felt in Russia more intensely with each passing day. On the other hand, after the attacks in Krasnodar city, unexplained mysterious situations began to occur at the Russian air base in Yeisk. A total of 6 Russian fighter bombers were lost after the fire and the drone attack on the Russian air base in the city of Yeisk. The disappearance of the Russian warplanes took place after the fire, which locals observed near Russian airspace. In the news that appeared earlier on the subject, the Ukrainian service had pointed out that the last images of the surrounding area were burned fields. The burnt areas are located on the territory of the 720.26th Air Defense Training Center of the Russian Air Force next to the airfield. The fire at that place may have been caused by the crash of a Ukrainian drone again. All these attacks actually showed that Ukraine had almost reached a remarkable level in carrying the water Russia, because as we mentioned in the video, there was a revival in Belgorod, one of the cities most targeted by the Ukrainian UAV army. The mayor of Belgorod, Valentin Demidov, announced in a statement he shared recently that the wreckage of 3 drones was found in Belgorod, Russia, but no injuries were reported. Meanwhile, one of the regional governors, Andrei Vorobayev, stated that a drone crashed near the village of Gorbatov in the Moscow region, about 400 miles from the Ukrainian border. Vorobayev reported that the UAV was located next to the Voskresensk gas compressor station, which belongs to Russia's energy giant Gazprom. The governors of the Kursk and Belgorod regions on the border with Ukraine have repeatedly accused the Ukrainian armed forces of bombing the border. However, Mikhailo Podolyak, one of President Volodymyr Zelensky's advisors, denied that Ukraine was carrying out attacks on Russian soil, emphasizing that Kiev was waging a defensive war to save all its lands from occupation, and that this was an axiom. Russian Federation official state news agency TASS reported that Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov was asked to deny that Podolyak had carried out attacks on Ukrainian targets on Russian territory. The Kremlin leader told reporters that the Ukrainian official's statements were not credible. On the other hand, the increase in panic and fragmentation in Russia was clearly observed as a reflection of the increase in domestic attacks on infrastructure facilities by unidentified UAVs. Although the Ukrainian side did not accept responsibility for the attacks, huge problems seemed to be imminent for the Russians. The statements of the official pointed out that such incidents would not come to an end in Russia as the Ukrainians lost their advantage in the territory of Ukraine. They could not find a solution to the striking explosions, fires, and drone attacks that took place within their own country's borders. In addition, in the Crimean Peninsula annexed by Russia, unmanned aerial vehicles belonging to the Ukrainian forces were constantly seen in the peninsula skies. In fact, Russia was in a much more advanced position in the air defense and defensive areas than the Ukrainian army in the first days of the war. The Russian army had attack planes, helicopters, and many other military vehicles, but the Ukrainians managed to take this military power from the Russians thanks to the ingenious strategy they have applied since the beginning of the war and the right cards that they have chosen. And if you're aware, there were serious gaps between Russia and Ukraine in terms of the number of soldiers, but the Ukrainians were able to close such gaps, as we mentioned, with unbelievable methods. In this way, the Ukrainians were able to recapture dozens of their cities from the Russians. All this data and the details of the war showed us that a war cannot be won only on paper. On top of all this, it takes determination, faith, and the fire of freedom to win a war.